The sun was beginning to set when Mary climbed the stairs of the luxury building for the last time that day. Her steps were heavy, dragged down by exhaustion from another grueling workday. Her back ached, and she felt a sharp pain in her right side that she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She couldn't afford to get sick, not when her little Lucy depended entirely on her. As she cleaned the last window on the 10th floor, her eyes caught her own reflection in the glass. The marks of time and hard labor were increasingly visible on her skin. Mary allowed herself a moment's pause, observing the city stretching beyond. That luxurious apartment. Down there somewhere, her 7-year-old daughter was waiting, probably sitting on the sidewalk in front of their tiny shack, playing with the only doll she owned, a gift Mary had managed to buy after months of saving. 8 tea. Coughing fit took her by surprise, making her double over. The cleaning cloth slipped from her hand, falling onto the impeccably clean floor. Mary leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath while tasting the metallic tang of blood in her mouth. Her hands trembled as she finally composed herself, and the fear she'd been trying to push away for so long finally caught up with her. That cough wasn't normal, and she knew it. It had started as something simple, one of those winter irritations, but now it was different. The blood was new, as were the pains that seemed to spread throughout her body. Mary wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a red stain on her work-worn skin. On her way home, each step of the subway stairs felt like a mountain to climb. The train car was packed as usual, and Mary found herself squeezed between people returning from work, all with their own problems and worries. Through the fogged window, she watched the stations pass by, counting the minutes until she could see her little Lucy. When she finally reached their street, she spotted her daughter exactly where she'd imagined. Lucy was sitting on the sidewalk, the doll resting in her lap as she drew imaginary figures on the ground with a piece of chalk. Her school uniform was a bit dirty, probably from playing in the dirt, but her face lit up with a smile when she saw her mother approaching. "Mommy!" Lucy ran toward her, arms open for a hug that Mary received with all the love in the world, ignoring the pain the movement caused in her body. "My love, how was school today?" Mary asked, trying to keep her voice steady as they walked home together. "The teacher said my drawing was the prettiest in class today," Lucy replied proudly, pulling a crumpled paper from her backpack. It was a simple stick figure drawing, one large and one small, holding hands under a smiling sun. Mary felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the drawing. There they were, alone in the world, but together. As it had always been since Lucy's father had abandoned them before the girl was even born. Mary had never let her daughter feel his absence, dedicating every moment of her life to being everything Lucy needed. That night, after preparing a simple dinner with what little she had in the pantry, Mary watched her daughter do homework under the dim light of their only lamp. Lucy bit her pencil in concentration, her little eyebrows furrowed as she solved math problems. The everyday scene, which once brought only joy, was now tainted by the shadow of fear growing in her chest. The coughing returned, stronger this time. Mary rushed to the small bathroom, closing the door behind her so Lucy wouldn't see her in that state. Blood stained the white sink and her legs weakened. She slid down to the floor, her back against the cold wall, as she tried to control her ragged breathing. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lucy's worried voice came from the other side of the door. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Mommy just has a little cough. It'll pass," Mary replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Keep doing your homework. I'll be out soon to help. You." But as she sat there on the cold bathroom floor, Mary knew nothing was okay. The fear she'd been trying to ignore was now too real to deny. If something happened to her, what would become of Lucy? Who would take care of her little girl? The child who was her only reason for living, who depended entirely on her. Mary got up with difficulty, washed her face, and dried her tears. When she left the bathroom, she found Lucy standing in the hallway, her big brown eyes full of worry. She forced a smile, the one she always used to reassure her daughter, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. "Let's finish that homework," Mary said, taking her daughter's hand and guiding her back to the table. But as she helped Lucy, with the numbers, her mind was far away, lost in worries about the uncertain future awaiting them. The clock showed nearly 9 when Mary finally managed to put Lucy to bed. The girl slept soundly, hugging her doll, unaware of the demons tormenting her mother. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter's peaceful face as the tears she'd held back all day finally found their way out. How would she tell? Lucy, she was sick. How could she explain to a 7-year-old that her only family in the world might not be there to see her grow up? The weight of these unanswered questions suffocated her more than the cough that was now her constant companion. The following weeks were an even greater challenge for Mary. The work that was already hard now seemed impossible. Her movements were slower, and with each passing day, she felt her strength slipping away like water through her fingers. But what tormented her most wasn't the physical pain. It was the worried looks Lucy gave her when she thought Mary wasn't looking. That Thursday morning, the sun had barely risen when Mary felt a strong dizziness upon standing. Her legs wobbled, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The room spun, and the cough, her unwanted companion, returned with full force. She knew she couldn't work that day, but the thought of losing a day's pay terrified her. "Mommy?" Lucy's sleepy voice came from the small mattress beside her. "Are you sick again?" Mary tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. It's nothing, sweetheart, just a silly little dizziness. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. When she tried to make breakfast for Lucy, her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the spoon. The bread fell to the floor twice before she managed to make a simple sandwich for her daughter to take to school. Lucy watched everything in silence, her big eyes filled with a worry no 7-year-old should carry. "You need to see a doctor." "Mommy," Lucy said with a seriousness that didn't match her age. "Teacher said when we're sick we have to go to the doctor." Mary felt her heart tighten. How could she explain to a child that there was no money for doctors, that every penny she earned barely covered rent and food, that the neighborhood clinic was always crowded, and the last time she'd tried to make an appointment they'd said the wait would be months? "Mommy will be fine, sweetheart. Now let's go, or you'll be late for school." The walk to school, which was usually a joyful time between them with Lucy telling stories and singing songs she learned in class, was silent today. Mary felt her daughter's gaze on her with every step she took, every time she had to stop to catch her breath. At the school gate, Lucy hugged her tighter than usual. "Promise you'll rest today, Mummy?" Mary nodded, feeling tears form in her eyes. "I promise, sweetheart. Now go, be a good girl." She watched her little girl enter the school, her backpack almost bigger than her, and felt a wave of despair wash over her. How would she work in this state? How would she keep a roof over their heads if she could barely stand? The walk to the building where she worked seemed endless. Each step was a battle, each breath a challenge. When she finally arrived, her uniform was already soaked with sweat, and her hands trembled so much she could barely type the building's entry code. "Mary, are you okay?" The voice of Mrs. Carmen, the supervisor, reached her before she even got to the locker room. "My God, woman, you're white as a sheet." Mary tried to answer, but another coughing fit stopped her. This time, she couldn't hide the blood staining her hand. Mrs. Carmen rushed to her, supporting her before she could fall. "You're in no condition to work today, not today, and not for the next few days from what I can see." "But Mrs. Carmen, I need to—" "Lucy, the rent." The words came out broken, mixed with coughs and tears now flowing freely down her face. "What you need is a doctor, and urgently." Mrs. Carmen helped her sit in a nearby chair. "I'll call an ambulance." "No, please." Mary grabbed the supervisor's arm tightly. "Lucy is at school. I can't leave her alone. She has no one but me." Mrs. Carmen's expression softened. She knew Mary's story, knew about the abandonment, the daily struggle to raise her daughter alone. "Then at least let me take you to the clinic. I can have someone pick Lucy up from school later." Mary wanted to refuse, wanted to say she'd be fine, that she just needed to rest a bit, but her body betrayed her. The pain was growing stronger, and breathing was harder. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to be helped. At the clinic, the hours dragged by. Mary sat on the hard waiting room chair, thinking of Lucy, how her daughter would react when she didn't find her at the school gate. How She'd explain all this to a child who had already lost so much. When she was finally called, the doctor didn't need long to realize the gravity of her condition. His words sounded like a sentence. "Mrs. Mary, you need to be hospitalized immediately. Your condition is serious." The world seemed to collapse around her. Hospitalized. What would happen to Lucy? Who would take care of her? How would she pay the bills? The questions multiplied in her mind as she was directed to the ambulance that would take her to the hospital. On the way, between the sirens and the ambulance's jolting, Mary could only think of her little girl, of the loneliness Lucy would feel coming home to an empty house, of the fear her daughter would have sleeping alone for the first time, of the tears she'd surely shed calling for her in the night's darkness. And it was with these images tormenting her, mind that Mary closed her eyes, overcome by exhaustion and illness, as the ambulance sped through the city streets, taking her to an uncertain fate, leaving behind the only reason for her existence. Lucy waited at the school gate for nearly an hour after the last of her classmates had gone home. Sitting on the first step, hugging her backpack, her eyes didn't leave the corner where her mother always appeared. Teacher Anna, worried, stayed with her, trying to contact any emergency number listed in the girl's records. The sun was beginning to set when Mrs. Carman finally arrived, breathless and with a worried expression. Lucy didn't know her well, having only seen her a few times when visiting her mother at work. The supervisor explained the situation to the teacher in a low voice, casting concerned glances at Lucy, who was trying to understand what was happening. "Your mother is sick, sweetheart," Mrs. Carman finally addressed her, crouching to eye level. "She had to go to the hospital, but everything will be okay. You'll stay with me for now." Lucy felt her small world crumble. The hospital. Was her mother that sick? Tears began streaming down her face before she could stop them. "I want to see my mom," she whispered between sobs. "Tomorrow morning we'll visit her, I promise," Mrs. Carman replied, taking her backpack. "Now let's go home. It's getting late." Mrs. Carman's apartment was small but cozy. There were flowers in the windows and photos on the walls, but Lucy barely noticed these details. Her thoughts were fixed on her mother, alone somewhere, sick. The woman tried to get her to eat something, but the food felt like sand in her mouth. That night, lying on a pull-out couch in Mrs. Carman's living room, Lucy couldn't sleep. Every street noise made her think her mother was arriving. Every shadow on the wall seemed to dance with memories of happy moments they'd shared in their tiny home. The next morning, Mrs. Carman took her to the hospital. The place was big and scary, with white walls and a strong smell that made her nose sting. People in white walked hurriedly through the halls, and the sound of strange machines echoed everywhere. When she finally saw her mother, Lucy barely recognized her. Mary was lying in a bed with tubes and wires connected to her body. Her face was paler than ever, and her eyes, normally so lively and bright, were closed. "Mommy," Lucy called softly, holding her mother's cold hand. Mary opened her eyes slowly, and a small smile formed on her lips when she saw her daughter. "My love," her voice was weak, almost a whisper, "I'm sorry I couldn't pick you up from school." Lucy wanted to say so many things. She wanted to tell her how much she'd missed her, how scared she was, how she wanted her to come home, but the words got stuck in her throat, turning into silent tears. "Don't cry, my little one." Mary tried to raise her hand to wipe her daughter's tears, but the movement seemed to require great effort. "Mommy just needs to rest a little. I'll be home with you soon." But days turned into weeks and Mary remained in the hospital. Lucy divided her time between school and hospital visits. Mrs. Carman became her temporary guardian, caring for her with affection, but nothing could replace her mother's love. It was during one of these visits that Lucy realized she needed to do something. Her mother was getting weaker, and the doctors always spoke in low voices about expensive treatments and medications not available in the public system. She could see the worry in all the adults' eyes around her. One afternoon after school, Lucy made a decision. She'd noticed that one of the residents in the building where her mother worked was always alone. He was a man who lived on the top floor in a huge apartment. She'd seen him sometimes when visiting her mother at work. He always seemed sad, despite all the luxury surrounding him. With a courage she didn't know she had, Lucy decided to ask him for help. After all, her mother always said God placed angels in our path when we needed them most. Maybe that man could be the angel her mother so desperately needed. Slipping away from Mrs. Carmen's watchful eye while she was busy with other tasks, Lucy took the elevator to the top floor. Her heart pounded as she stood before apartment 1001. She took a deep breath, remembering her mother's pale face in the hospital, and found the courage to ring the bell. The seconds that followed felt like an eternity. Lucy could hear footsteps approaching from the other side of the door, and her small body trembled with nerves. When the door finally opened, revealing the tall, imposing figure of Gregory Adams, she almost lost her courage. But her love for her mother was stronger than any fear. With a trembling yet determined voice, she spoke the words that would forever change the course of their lives. "Mister, please help my mommy." Gregory Adams stared at the small figure at his door with a mix of surprise and discomfort. Wearing a worn school uniform and holding a backpack almost bigger than herself, the girl looked at him with eyes that held a sadness too deep for her age. For a moment he considered closing the door. Other people's problems had never been his concern, but something in the child's choked voice stopped him. "Your mother?" he asked, trying to recall the faces of the building's staff. "Who is she?" "Mary," Lucy replied, her fingers nervously clutching her backpack strap. "She cleans your apartment every Monday and Thursday, but now she's very sick in the hospital, and the doctors say she needs expensive medicine." The name made Gregory remember. Mary was the quiet cleaner who'd been taking care of his apartment for years, always efficient and discreet. He barely exchanged words with her beyond the occasional good morning or cleaning instructions. Now confronted with her daughter, he realized how indifferent he'd been to that woman's life. "Come in," he said after a long hesitation, surprising himself with the invitation. Lucy took small steps into the luxurious apartment, her wide eyes scanning the surroundings. The contrast between her world and this place couldn't be greater. The shiny marble floor reflected the light coming through the huge glass windows, and the expensive furniture seemed never to have been used. "Sit down," Gregory indicated one of the leather couches in the living room, feeling strangely uncomfortable in his own space. The girl obeyed, sitting on the edge of the couch, her short legs barely reaching the floor. Her small hands were clasped in her lap, and she bit her lower lip, clearly nervous. "How long has your mother been in the hospital?" he asked, remaining standing as if physical distance could protect him from the emotional involvement this situation threatened to create. 3 weeks, Lucy replied, her voice trembling slightly. "She's very weak and the doctors say she needs special treatment, but we don't have money and I—" She stopped, swallowing a sob. "I don't want to lose my mom." The last words were whispered between tears now freely flowing down the girl's face. Gregory felt something tighten in his chest, a long-forgotten feeling of empathy and compassion. He approached hesitantly, sitting in the armchair facing the couch. His mind, trained to deal with numbers and business, tried to process this unexpected situation. Why had this child chosen to come to him? What did she expect him to do? "Where are you staying?" he asked, realizing a 7-year-old couldn't be alone. "With Mrs. Carmen, the building supervisor," Lucy explained, wiping her tears with the backs of her hands. "She's very nice to me, but—" Her voice failed again. "I just want my mom back." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with emotions Gregory didn't know how to handle. Here he was, a man who had dedicated his life to accumulating wealth and power, confronted with the devastating simplicity of a child's love for her mother. "Which hospital is she in?" he finally asked, picking up his phone. "At St. Francis Municipal Hospital," Lucy replied, a small glimmer of hope appearing in her eyes. "Room 304. Gregory made some quick calls, using his name and influence to get information about Mary's condition. What he discovered disturbed him more than he cared to admit. The situation was serious, an aggressive cancer requiring immediate and specialized treatment. While on the phone, he glanced sideways at Lucy. The girl sat exactly as he'd left her, her hands still clasped, her eyes fixed on him as if he were her last hope. And perhaps he was, he realized with a weight in his heart. "I'll help your mother," he said after hanging up, the words leaving his mouth before he could think too much about them. "But first, we need to find Mrs. Carmen. She must be worried." "About you?" Lucy's face lit up with a smile that made something inside Gregory squirm uncomfortably. It was a smile of pure gratitude, something he wasn't accustomed to receiving in his world of business transactions and veiled interests. As he accompanied Lucy to Mrs. Carmen's apartment, Gregory wondered what he was getting himself into. Helping Mary would mean more than just paying for her treatment. It would mean getting involved, caring, opening a breach in his carefully controlled life. But seeing Lucy run into Mrs. Carmen's waiting arms at her apartment door, Gregory knew there was no turning back. That child, with her innocent courage and profound pain, had achieved what no one else had in years. She'd broken through the walls he'd built around himself. And now, standing in the hallway of the building where he'd lived so long without really knowing anyone, Gregory began to feel the weight of a responsibility he'd never sought, but that somehow seemed destined to change his life forever. The next morning, Gregory found himself doing something he'd never imagined, walking through the sterile corridors of a public hospital. The smell of disinfectant and the distant sound of heart monitors created an atmosphere that made him deeply uncomfortable. His expensive clothes and rigid posture stood out starkly against the environment, drawing curious looks from patients and staff. When he reached room 304, he hesitated before knocking. Through the small window, he could see Mary lying in bed, thinner and paler than he remembered. The sight caught him off guard. It was as if he were seeing her for the first time, no longer as the silent worker who cleaned his apartment, but as a human being fighting for her life. "Come in," a weak voice responded to his hesitant knock. Mary tried to sit up when she recognized him, her eyes widening in surprise and confusion. "Mr. Adams? What?" "So your daughter came to see me yesterday," he interrupted, keeping a safe distance from the bed. "She told me about your situation." Mary's face twisted in a mix of shame and worry. "I'm sorry, sir. Lucy shouldn't have bothered you with our problems. She's just a child. She doesn't understand." "Don't apologize," Gregory cut her off again, his voice softer than intended. "Your daughter showed more courage than many adults I know." A heavy silence settled in the room. Mary looked away toward the window, where cheap curtains danced in the morning breeze. Her hands trembled slightly on the hospital sheet. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Gregory asked, surprising himself with the question. Since when did he care about his employees' personal problems? Mary gave a sad laugh that quickly turned into a cough. "You barely notice when I'm in your apartment, Mr. Adams. Why would I tell you about my illness?" The words hit him like a slap. It was true. In all these years, he'd never really looked at her, never cared to know if she had family, if she was okay, if she needed anything. Mary was just another cog in the machine that kept his life comfortable and organized. "I've spoken with your doctors," he said, changing the subject. "I'm transferring you to a private hospital today. There's a specialist who—" "No," Mary interrupted, her voice weak but firm. "I can't accept that. It's too much money and I have no way to pay." "I'm not offering a loan," Gregory replied, a sudden irritation growing in his chest. Why was she refusing his help? "I'm trying to save your life." "Why?" The question was simple but loaded with meaning. "Why do you care now?" Gregory had no answer, or rather he was afraid of the answer beginning to form in his mind. Lucy's eyes, full of hope and despair, had awakened something in him he'd thought long dead, his humanity. "Because your daughter made me see something I'd forgotten," he finally answered, his voice rougher than usual. "That money means nothing if it can't be used to help someone who truly needs it." Mary stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to find the truth behind his words. A new coughing fit shook her, and Gregory instinctively moved closer, helping her sit up better in bed. "Lucy needs you," he continued, keeping his hand on her back as the coughing subsided. "And you need proper treatment. There's nothing more to discuss." Tears began streaming silently down Mary's face, resigned. "She's all I have," she whispered. All that's ever mattered in my life." "I know," Gregory replied, feeling a lump form in his throat. "That's why you need to fight. For her." In that moment, looking at this woman who had always been invisible, to him, Gregory felt something shift inside. This wasn't just about helping Mary, it was about redeeming years of indifference, of living in a bubble of privilege without truly seeing the world around him. "I'll take care of everything," he said, picking up his phone. "An ambulance will be here in an hour for the transfer. And don't worry about Lucy. She'll stay with Mrs. Carmen until you recover." Mary closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. He made the necessary calls to arrange the transfer. Gregory watched Mary from the corner of his eye. She looked so small and fragile in that hospital bed, so different from the efficient woman he knew. And yet there was a strength in her he'd never noticed before, the strength of a mother refusing to abandon her daughter. What he didn't know, as he arranged the transfer and treatment, was that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change not just Mary and Lucy's lives, but his own, in ways he could never have imagined. The weeks at the private hospital dragged on with agonizing slowness. Mary underwent intense treatment sessions that left her body even more debilitated, but she refused to give up. Every time Lucy visited, she mustered all her strength to smile, to appear stronger than she really was, even if it consumed her from within. Gregory, for his part, found himself increasingly involved in the situation. What had started as a charitable gesture was becoming something deeper and more unsettling. He caught himself thinking about Mary and Lucy at unexpected moments, worrying about them in a way he couldn't explain to himself. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after an especially aggressive chemotherapy session, he found Lucy sitting alone in the hospital hallway, her little legs swinging on a chair too big for her size. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Today's Saturday," she replied without looking at him, her eyes fixed on her hands. "Uncle Gregory, why do the medicines make Mommy worse before making her better?" The question caught him off guard. How to explain something so complex to a child? How to justify the suffering of someone she loved so much? "Sometimes," he began, choosing his words carefully, "to get really better, we need to go through hard times first. It's like cleaning a wound. It hurts when we apply the medicine, but it's necessary to heal." Lucy finally looked at him, her big eyes full of wisdom beyond her years. "You're different too," she observed. "Less sad." "Sad?" Gregory frowned. "Why did you think I was sad?" "Because you were always alone in that big apartment," she replied with childlike simplicity. "And you never smiled. Now you smile sometimes." Lucy's words struck him with unexpected force. It was true. His luxurious apartment had always been more of a prison than a home. His professional achievements, his financial empire, all seemed empty compared to the purity of the love between Mary and her daughter. "Know what else changed about you?" Lucy continued, now playing with the hem of her dress. "Before, you looked through people, like they were invisible. Now you really look at them." Gregory felt his throat tighten. How could a 7-year-old see so clearly what it had taken him a lifetime to realize? "Mommy always says God puts angels in our path," Lucy said, her small voice soft. "But sometimes I think you needed an angel too. Maybe that's why God made Mommy sick." "No," he interrupted more sharply than intended. "God doesn't make people sick to teach others lessons. Your mother is sick because sometimes bad things happen to good people." "Then why are you helping us?" she asked, her eyes fixed on him with disconcerting intensity. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Gregory thought of all the reasons he could give: compassion, moral duty, social responsibility. But the truth was, simpler and more frightening than any of them. "Because you helped me first," he finally answered, surprising himself with his honesty. "You showed me something I'd forgotten." "What?" "That being rich doesn't mean being happy. That having everything means nothing if you have no one to share it with." Lucy smiled, a sweet yet sad smile. "You can share with us," she said, taking his hand with her small fingers. "Mommy always says family isn't just blood." Gregory felt something warm and wet run down his face and realized, with astonishment, that he was crying. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Perhaps at his parents' death, so long ago it seemed like another life. A nurse appeared in the hallway calling Lucy to see her mother. The girl jumped from the chair, but before leaving, turned and gave Gregory a quick hug. It was a simple, spontaneous gesture that left him paralyzed. As he watched Lucy's small figure disappear through Mary's hospital room door, Gregory remained seated in the hallway, feeling the weight of tears on his face and a strange lightness in his heart. Something was changing within him, something deep and irreversible, and for the first time in a long time the change didn't frighten him. On the contrary, it was as if he were finally awakening from a long sleep, as if he were relearning how to feel, to care, to truly live. Autumn arrived, bringing cold winds and even colder news. Despite all the treatment, the money invested, and the best specialists, Mary's body wasn't responding as hoped. The doctors began speaking in increasingly pessimistic terms, using words like palliative and comfort in their conversations with Gregory. On a particularly cold morning, he was in his office trying to focus on financial reports when he received the call from the hospital. Mary had worsened during the night and wanted to see him. Something in her weak, yet determined, voice made him drop everything and rush there. When he entered the room, he found Mary sitting up in bed, propped against several pillows. She was even thinner, her skin almost transparent under the hospital's cold light, but her eyes, though tired, held a frightening clarity. "I need you to promise me something," she said as soon as he approached, skipping any preliminaries. "Mary, don't talk as if—" "Please," she interrupted, her voice firm despite the weakness. "I need to know Lucy will be okay." Gregory felt his heart tighten. "You'll be okay. The doctors—" "Don't lie to me," Mary said with a sad smile. "I may be poor and uneducated, but I'm not stupid. I feel my body giving up a little more each day." He sat in the chair beside the bed, unable to respond. What could he say? How could he deny what was before his eyes? "Gregory," she continued, using his first name for the first time, "you've changed these past months. I've seen something awaken in you, something good. That's why I need to ask you this." "What?" "Take care of my Lucy." The words came out broken. By tears she didn't try to hold back. "Don't let her go to a shelter. Don't let her lose the chance at a better life." "Mary, don't talk like this. Promise me," she insisted, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Promise you'll care for her as if she were your own, that you'll give her the opportunities I never could." Gregory felt the weight of that request like a physical blow. Take care of Lucy? Him, who barely knew how to take care of himself, who'd spent his entire life running from emotional responsibilities. "I'm not sure I'm the best person," he began, but Mary interrupted again. "You're exactly the right person," she said, her voice softer now, "because you need her as much as she'll need you." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen how you've changed since Lucy knocked on your door. I've seen your humanity awaken, your heart open. My daughter did that, Gregory. She brought light into your life just as she did into mine." Tears now flowed freely down Mary's face, but there was a serenity in her expression that frightened him more than her physical fragility. "I can't replace you," he said, his voice rough. "No one can." "I'm not asking you to replace me," Mary replied. "I'm asking you to be yourself, this new self you're discovering. I'm asking you to give her the chance to grow up in an environment of love and security." Gregory closed his eyes, feeling the weight of this decision. How could he deny a mother's last request? How could he turn his back on that child who, without meaning to, had changed his life in so many ways? "I promise," he finally said, squeezing Mary's hand, "I promise I'll care for her as if she were my own daughter." A smile of pure relief lit up Mary's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now I can leave in peace." "Don't talk like that," Gregory pleaded, his voice breaking. "There's still hope." Mary shook her head gently. "There's always hope, Gregory, just not in the way we imagine. Sometimes hope is knowing our children will be okay, even when we're no longer here. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the heart monitor and the rain beginning to fall outside. Gregory remained there holding Mary's hand as she slowly fell asleep, exhausted by the conversation. Looking at this woman who, in just a few months, had become so important in his life, Gregory felt the weight of his promise. This wasn't just about taking care of Lucy. It was about honoring Mary's legacy, about being the person she believed he could be. And for the first time in his life, the fear of failing was smaller than his determination to succeed. The night Mary passed was as silent as the snow beginning to fall outside. Lucy was sleeping at Mrs. Carmen's apartment when Gregory received the call from the hospital. He remained by the bedside until the end, holding Mary's hand as she gently left this world, like a candle extinguishing without fanfare. Now, sitting in his office in the cold early morning, Gregory faced the hardest task of his life. How to tell a 7-year-old child that her mother wouldn't be coming home. The doctor's words still echoed in his mind. She didn't suffer. It was peaceful. She was at peace. But what peace could there be in leaving a daughter behind? The sun hadn't yet risen when he arrived at Mrs. Carmen's apartment. The supervisor was awake, as if she'd sensed something was wrong. Her swollen eyes said she already knew. She woke. Up several times last night? Mrs. Carmen whispered, looking toward the room where Lucy slept, calling for her mother. Gregory felt his heart break a little more. How could he do this? How could he be the bearer of news that would forever change that child's life? Lucy appeared in the bedroom doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes. When she saw Gregory, her face lit up momentarily, but quickly turned to worry when she noticed his expression. "Uncle Gregory," her small voice trembled. "Why are you here so early? Did something happen to Mommy?" He knelt to her level, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Lucy, my love," he began, his voice failing. "Your mother, she—" He didn't need to finish. Lucy looked into his eyes and understood. A guttural sound like that of a wounded animal escaped her throat before she threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "No, no, no," she repeated between sobs. "She promised she'd get better. She promised." Gregory held her tight, feeling the girl's hot tears soak his shirt. There were no words to comfort that pain, no explanation that made sense to a child who had just lost her entire world. The hours that followed were a blur of tears, hugs, and heavy silences. Lucy alternated between moments of intense crying and periods of frightening silence, as if her small body didn't know how to process such profound loss. During the funeral, she refused to let go of Gregory's hand. She stood beside him, quiet and pale as a small statue, as people approached to offer condolences. Her eyes, normally so lively and bright, were dull, fixed on a distant point only she could see. It was only when it was time to close the casket that Lucy reacted. She broke free from Gregory's grip and ran to her mother, her small hands clutching the casket's edge. "Mommy, please don't leave me," she begged, her voice breaking the room's silence like a cry of pain. "I promise I'll be good. I promise I'll never be any trouble, but please don't go." Gregory felt his legs weaken. He approached Lucy, trying gently to pull her away from the casket, but she held on tighter. "No, I don't want her to go. You can't take her." Lucy's sobs echoed through the chapel, breaking everyone's heart. Gregory finally managed to pick her up, feeling her small body shake with the force of her crying. "Shh, I'm here," he whispered in her ear, rocking her like a baby. "I'm here and I won't leave you alone, never." Lucy buried her face in his neck, her hot tears wetting his skin. "Promise?" she asked between sobs. "I promise," he replied, his voice firm despite his own tears. "Your mother made me promise to take care of you, and that's what I'll do." On the way home, Lucy fell asleep in the car, exhausted from crying. Gregory carried her to his apartment, where he'd already prepared a room for her. He laid her gently in bed, watching her tear-stained face even in sleep. Sitting beside Lucy's bed, watching her restless sleep, Gregory felt the full weight of his promise. This wasn't just about providing shelter or material comfort. It was about filling the immense void Mary had left, about being family for a child who had lost everything. And as the night wore on, bringing with it the promise of a new day, Gregory made a silent promise to Mary. He would be for Lucy everything she needed, even if it meant relearning how to love, to feel, to be part of a family again. The weight of this commitment settled heavily on his shoulders, yet there was an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his own parents had passed away decades ago. The days that followed were a relentless test of Gregory's resolve. Grief manifested in Lucy in ways he hadn't anticipated. Some mornings she'd wake with a quiet determination, meticulously folding her clothes or organizing her school bag as if control over small things could compensate for the enormity of her loss. Other days she'd refuse to leave her room, clutching her mother's old sweater to her chest, her sobs muffled against the fabric. One evening, while sorting through Mary's belongings, a task Lucy had initially resisted, she froze when she found a small notebook tucked beneath the mattress. Its pages were filled with Mary's cramped handwriting, grocery lists, reminders for Lucy's school events, and, toward the end, fragmented notes about her illness. "Doctor says it's spread. Need to tell Lucy soon how she's so little." Asked Mrs. Carman about shelters just in case. God, please no. "Gregory Adams? Maybe. He's cold but not cruel. Lucy likes his building. If I beg..." Lucy's hands shook as she traced her mother's words. Gregory, kneeling beside her, felt his throat tighten. Mary had been planning this even before her daughter knocked on his door. "She chose you," Lucy whispered, her voice raw. "She thought you'd say no." Gregory exhaled. Sharply. "I almost did." The admission hung between them. He'd been moments away from shutting the door that day, from retreating into his sterile, solitary life. Now he couldn't fathom that version of himself. Lucy snapped the notebook shut, her tiny jaw set. "I want to keep it." "Of course," he said, then hesitantly, "We could add to it. Write letters to her, whatever you want." Lucy's eyes flickered with something like hope. That night, she penned her first entry. "Dear Mommy, Uncle Gregory made pancakes. They were burnt. I miss yours. He tries. I think you'd laugh. Love, Lucy." The seasons turned, and with them, small transformations took root. Gregory converted his home office into a bedroom for Lucy, painting the walls the sky blue she'd picked out herself. He learned to braid hair badly, to tolerate glitter-covered school projects on his mahogany desk, and to decipher the mysterious social hierarchies of second grade. Yet shadows lingered. On the anniversary of Mary's death, Lucy disappeared after school. Gregory found her at the cemetery, her knees dug into the earth beside the headstone, her hands covered in dirt. "I planted flowers," she said defiantly, pointing to the scraggly marigolds she'd shoved into the soil. "So she's not alone." Gregory knelt beside her, ignoring the mud staining his trousers. "She's not alone, Lucy, and neither are you." He reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside was a locket, one he'd had engraved with Mary's name. "For the photo you carry in your backpack, so she's always close." Lucy's breath hitched. For a long moment she just stared. Then, with a fierceness that startled him, she threw her arms around his neck. "I hate that she's gone," she choked out. "I know," Gregory murmured, holding her tighter. "Me too." Years later, on Lucy's first day of high school, Gregory stood on the porch watching her stride toward the bus stop. At 14, she was all limbs and confidence, her mother's resilience etched into every step. "Wait!" he called suddenly, jogging after her. He adjusted the locket around her neck, the same one she'd worn every day since he'd given it to her. "It's crooked." Lucy rolled her eyes but smiled. "You're such a dad." The word, so casually uttered, struck him silent. Dad. Not Uncle Gregory, not guardian. Dad. The bus pulled away, Lucy waving through the window. Gregory stood there, the autumn wind biting at his cheeks, and realized he was smiling. Mary's daughter, their daughter, was going to be okay, and so was he.